We have Comrade Donald Corder here with us today. Hello, Donald. How's it going?
Hey there, comrades. Thanks for the invitation. I'm doing well. How are you?
We're doing very good. Just to provide a short introduction of who you are, Donald is the editor in chief of the Revolution Report, which is a terrific project. Please go check out their work both on YouTube and their website. They put out great articles and they do great videos and live streams. He is also the director of, quote, 8 years before, an award winning documentary film about the Donbass conflict. I would definitely recommend checking that out. We'll link that to the video later on. He's been to the Donbass many times before the beginning of the special military operations. He's a Marxist Leninist international journalist and supporter of Russia's SMOs. He's traveled across the entire former Soviet sphere and has made many videos interviewing older people about what it was like to live in the USSR, the vast majority of which, of course, had only good things to say about it. So thank you so much for coming on, Donald.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for the invitation.
So I wanted to ask the first question, somewhat broadly, but what is going on in Russia? The Western media is painting this as a coup on the part of Prigozhin and the Wagner PMC. Is that true? And if so, what is the likelihood that it'll be successful?
Well, it's good to start with a broad question, I would say, because there's a lot you could talk about, even though this has only been going on for about a day right now. I think, and even for the Western media, right? It's pretty tricky for them to cover this situation because, and there's this meme that's been circulating around the internet actually of the sweating guy with two buttons, right? Wagner are heroes or Wagner are villains, because the Western media doesn't really know whose side to take here. Because in reality, right, and it is, according to Vladimir Putin and the Russian government, this is an armed insurrection. This is a really serious situation. But Prigozhin is not, Prigozhin and the Wagner group, they're not like these kinds of, pro-Western, obviously, anti-Putin people that the West probably would have liked to see. I mean, they are not actually even saying that they're against Vladimir Putin. Their main grievance is against specifically the leadership of the Russian Defense Ministry, specifically the Defense Minister Shoigu and his ministers. This private military company has taken issue with the way that the military, the way the Russian military leadership has been carrying out the military operation against Ukraine. And this is something that Prigozhin was talking about for a long time, but now he accused the Defense Ministry of bombing one of the Wagner military camps in the back lines in Donbass, something that the Defense Ministry denies. But Prigozhin says it's true. And so all of a sudden last night, they turned around and started marching on Rostov-on-Don, which is like one of the, I think it is the biggest city closest to the border with the new territories, the Donbass People's Republics. And they just walked in with heavy tanks, with a wide array of armored vehicles, 25,000 troops, according to Prigozhin. They just walked in and took over all of the government infrastructure there. And there are some videos circulating that suggest that there was some fighting, but a lot of those are unconfirmed. And even the confirmed videos don't show actually fighting. They show some, there was an explosion at some point. There was a little bit of shooting going on, but not directed at actual people. So generally, they just walked in without much opposition. And since then, they've been marching on Moscow, which has caused the government here to, by the way, I'm in Moscow right now for all the viewers who don't necessarily know that. It's caused the Moscow government to take tons of measures. We're right now under an anti-terrorist regime, is what the government here is calling it. And basically that means that they encourage everyone to stay inside. You can't go outside without your papers. If you do, then they could put you in jail. So far, martial law hasn't been declared, and the government said they don't plan on declaring that. But it's interesting to note that just a couple hours after Putin's administration said they weren't going to declare martial law, they actually amended the law regarding consequences for violating martial law in the Russian Federation. So obviously, it kind of points to the possibility that isn't 100% off the table. But So this is something that actually, a lot of people are obviously worried about right now in Moscow. It's a pretty crazy situation. But I have to say, in my personal experience, I don't see like tanks driving around the streets or anything. Life in my neighborhood is continuing as normal, and I live pretty close to the center. But I have seen confirmed photos and videos of the Russian National Guard creating roadblocks in the southern part of the city. They blew up a bridge. They've destroyed some roads to try and obstruct the advance of Prigozhin's forces that are coming from the south towards Moscow. But again, the latest piece of news, actually, which may just turn everything I just said around, is that apparently Alexander Lukashenko, the president of Belarus, just announced that he was able to broker some sort of agreement between the Russian government and Prigozhin's private military company. And according to reports that I just saw literally minutes ago, Prigozhin made a statement saying that he turned around and he's going back to his private military company's bases in Donbass because they came to an agreement. What that agreement is, I'm not really sure. I saw this information minutes ago, so it's possible it hasn't been confirmed, or maybe it has been, but I'm not sure. That's the latest news that's come out of that. All I could say about being in Moscow specifically is that there's a lot of tension and people are worried about what's going to happen. But if that news is true, that they came to an agreement, that would be really good, because the FSB said that they're opening a criminal case against Prigozhin for this. Vladimir Putin gave a national address at the beginning of today saying that people who betray the country are going to be really punished to the full extent of the law. A number of generals and governors have come out publicly calling on Wagner to not do this at this time where the country's at war with NATO, with Western fascism in Ukraine. I mean, it really puts the entire Russian war effort at risk when you have this sort of stuff going on in the rear lines,
For sure. That's a great analysis, and thank you for that. I've been hearing from some analysts for a while now that Prigozhin has become increasingly critical of the military higher-ups in the special military operation. And they've been predicting that he'll have to be dealt with at some point. So how do you think that Russia will deal with this and deal with Prigozhin? I guess now with the new news coming out, the dynamic kind of changes, but are they just going to allow him to go back to the front line, or is there still going to be some kind of legal action taken against him, do you think?
That's a really good question, because obviously this is one of the biggest news stories that we've seen in a very long time. I mean, we're talking about in major cities in Russia, there are like tanks driving down normal civilian roads. This is not something that's happened since 30 years ago, when there was the 1993 Black October situation where there was like open fighting in the streets of Moscow, and under Yeltsin's orders, they bombed the White House, right? That's the last time there was this kind of huge military presence in ordinary streets around the in Rostov-on-Don, or in the in like the suburbs of Moscow. Again, I haven't seen them myself, but I've seen pictures and videos of it as well. How the government's going to deal with it? I mean, I don't know if they're just going to let Prigozhin walk away after all this. I mean, again, he has been officially accused of treason, and the FSB has officially opened a criminal investigation against him. So like, whether or not they come to an agreement, there's still this, I guess, elephant in the room of a criminal investigation that was launched, and the fact that it's the whole capital is under an anti-terrorist regime because of what he did. I don't know if the government is going to just allow him to walk away from that. Maybe they'll try to, demote him, or like try and break the government's reliance on the private military company in the special military operation. That's possible too, and that's actually something that I think the Russian government has been trying to do ever since Artyomovsk was liberated from by Russian forces, specifically by the Wagner Group. Ever since then, a lot of the areas that have been held and taken by the Wagner Group they've actually been replaced by the Akhmat brigades from Chechnya, Kadyrov's troops. And those troops have actually been deployed to intercept Wagner's troops right now, actually. So that's another aspect I forgot to mention, that Akhmatli troops have been deployed, and there's also confirmed videos of them traveling to meet the Wagner troops. And it could be a really bad situation if this compromise is not confirmed and ends up just being something that's not true. But I hope it is. It looks like it is. And in terms of how the government might deal with this private military company, even it's a difficult question even when we have this situation we've just seen, because I would say that it's probably safe to say that Wagner troops are the most hardened, battle hardened, experienced troops fighting for the Russian military right now in the special military operation, which is probably one of the reasons that they were just able to waltz into Rostov-on-Don and then start advancing towards Moscow. They walked right into the city of Rostov-on-Don, took over government buildings. Little to no fighting happened. Probably the military there was like, we're not going to fight our own people, especially not the most battle-hardened, experienced people in the Russian military. They didn't want to see bloodshed or get involved in some sort of civil war. And I'm sure in terms of what I have seen from the videos and everything, I'm sure the government also didn't want things to end that way either. Because think about the fact that, according to Prigozhin, he has 25,000 troops, and by the videos we've seen, he's got heavy battle tanks, a wide array of armored vehicles. And what was standing in his way? Well, mainly National Guard forces and police forces that didn't seem to have that much heavy equipment. Obviously we don't know what the Ministry of Defense has up its sleeve in Moscow. Maybe there's reinforcements that we don't know about. The Ministry of Defense has been pretty tight-lipped about its response through all this. But according to the videos that are available, it looks like Wagner is the superior force here. So that's another thing. How to deal with this, how the government's going to deal with Prigozhin when he has all this influence and a very, very powerful military force that's loyal to only him. I mean, that's a difficult question. And this is one of the reasons why, in Russia, mercenaries are actually illegal, but the Wagner Group is considered a private military contractor, which legally has different strings attached to it than conventional mercenaries. And also it's not an organization that's based in Russia. So it's sort of, a difficult organization to deal with. And I think the Russian government, from the beginning of its cooperation with this organization, knew about that as well.
Interesting. It seems like a sort of rivalry has developed between Prigozhin and Sergei Shoigu. Am I pronouncing his name right?
Yeah,
yeah. And I've been hearing too that perhaps this was prompted by Shoigu's success combating the Ukrainian counteroffensive, and that Prigozhin is looking to elevate himself, or he was angered by that in some way. Is there any truth to that? And then I guess, do you think the rivalry between these two will continue and continue to cause problems? Or?
Well, I think the rivalry is very real. Yes, definitely. I mean, Prigozhin has actually made that clear publicly, especially when, the first real public explosion probably was when the Wagner troops were just about to take over Artyomovsk, and the Ukrainian military was putting up really heavy resistance. Prigozhin accused the Ministry of Defense of not providing the private military company with enough munitions for it to effectively achieve its objectives in the area. And Prigozhin said that because of the deficit in munitions, his private military company had taken significantly more casualties than necessary. Now, that is what Prigozhin says, but there are other people who, have come out publicly connected to the Wagner Group saying that that's just nonsense, that they were given adequate munitions from the Ministry of Defense. So there's a bit of lack of understanding as to how much truth there is to what Prigozhin was saying. But what everyone does know is that the military operation, I mean, at this point, I don't think anyone's in doubt that the military operation did not go as planned at the beginning. It required a serious tactical, rethinking after the beginning. They thought it was going to end very quickly, and that they had a plan and a strategy that just did not work out. And this is something, this is public knowledge. Even Vladimir Putin said publicly that the military operation has had difficulties. The draft in Russia, when they drafted a number of reservists, was had quite a few problems that needed to be dealt with. On a government level, there were problems with munitions. A lot of soldiers who were sent to the special military operation zone were promised that they would be fully equipped. And there ended up being a deficit of munitions and equipment, and a lot of people had to go there and actually buy their own military equipment, which I think is really messed up. And that's something that disillusioned a lot of Russian people, and that's especially soldiers. And I think that's why Prigozhin has actually a lot of support, enough support for him to march on Moscow. But obviously, that's not the overwhelming character of the military operation as we see right now. Obviously that stuff happened, but it was not as widespread as the Western media was trying to make it out to be. It's the same thing with these like anti-war protests that happened right after Russia launched its military operation as well. They were very, very small. Several hundred people were arrested in Moscow at these protests. In a city of like millions and millions and millions of people, that's a really small number. Actually, I remember how the protests against the COVID lockdowns were. They were much bigger. People had a much bigger problem with the COVID lockdowns and COVID restrictions in Russia than they did with the military operation. But still, we see it all over the Western media, even though this point of view represents a small minority of people. And it's the same thing with the Russian military conditions in the special military operation zone as well. Yeah, there were problems like that, and they could have been easily avoided. But Russia has not had to deal with a military situation like this for a very long time. There are obviously problems in military stockpiles, or there were, old equipment, this and that. But again, on the whole, things were good enough for Russia to, as we see now, crush the Ukrainian counteroffensive. Even though all this stuff is going on right now, and the Ukrainian military is trying to take advantage of it. They've concentrated their forces near Artyomovsk for another attempt at breaking the Russian lines, but they've been horribly unsuccessful. So that goes to show that in general, the Russian war effort is doing very, very well. But there were serious problems, and a lot of them have been rectified at this point. But it's something that Prigozhin and this military, the Wagner, for example, is what I mean. They're upset about it, and they're trying to use this as their sort of political ammunition against the Ministry of Defense that they have this personal vendetta with. A lot of people say that Prigozhin is acting like this because he's got like severe PTSD, and he's just like out of whack for being in a military zone for so long, because he has been there for a very long time, and being in a situation like that, for even if you're there for like over 4 months, you're like, that's a guarantee you're going to have some sort of psychological trauma, just being around dead people all the time and having to deal with the threat of random artillery bombardments. It's going to have a negative effect on anyone's mind. So Prigozhin's been there for a very long time, and they're saying that he might have PTSD, and this might be influencing the way he's acting. I mean, I'm not sure. I can't. I'll leave it to the West to psychoanalyze leaders and try to make conclusions based on that. But yeah, that's what people are saying.
That's an important point too, because there's a subjective dimension that we should never forget. These are, at the end of the day, people. But I can't help but think that Prigozhin wouldn't understand how that move that hopefully has been corrected in the last few minutes. But I can't help but think that he's ignorant to how that would function as fuel to the narrative of fascist Ukraine and the NATO forces. So, I mean, you said that the Wagner group is definitely with Prigozhin, and I wanted to ask, how's the like the rest of the Russian military? Is there any sympathy for Prigozhin? Is there the opposite of sympathy, hatred for the fact that he's given Ukraine and NATO now this fuel to attack Russia and the SMOs?
Well, I can only go off, of course, on reports I've seen and videos and pictures as well. You know, according to Prigozhin, Wagner came into Rostov on Don, and people were like hugging them and giving them food, and they welcomed them and everything. That's according to Prigozhin. According to the Russian Defense Ministry, like there have already been a significant number of Wagner fighters that said, you know, we're not going to be a part of this, and they contacted the Ministry of Defense and basically defected. That's according to the Russian government. What I saw from videos, and I've been following it since it began, is just kind of confusion, really. You know, the Wagner group marched into Rostov-on-Don. There wasn't any evidence of them abusing people or doing anything, you know, messed up, but they were just standing there. Civilians were walking down the street right next to the tanks. I mean, there was some footage of people running away because there was some shooting around a government building at one point. But so far, I don't think there's been serious stuff like that in terms of some sort of serious abuse of people or anything like that. But in terms of the actual Russian military, right, the ones in the military, special military operations zone, they're just still fighting. They haven't. They're obviously they've heard of what's happened, but they're not in any way like. They're just still fighting the Ukrainians, holding their positions and everything. In the behind the lines in Rostov region around the path to Moscow, I don't know. I haven't really seen any sort of embrace of Wagner. Just kind of people are trying to treat it neutrally and not get in their way. And that's because Prigozhin, when he started this, he was like, if anyone gets in our way, then we're going to consider you our enemy. But if you stay out of our way, then we're not. So essentially, people have just, it looks like people just don't really want to get involved.
Thank you. And just a more logistical question here that comes from the audience. Thank you for the question, Shinborska. Where does Wagner get their oil, spare parts, food, clothing, etc.? They are a small group with zero logistical backing. Like, what would the conditions for the possibility of this potential coup that hopefully now has been squashed thanks to the mediational efforts of Lukashenko, but would it have been even physically possible? Like, how would they have been able to continue the fight, and who would have stopped that if Russia is not doing so?
Well, I can't say for sure because I'm not like an expert in in Wagner's, I guess, company structure, but I would assume that they generated on their own, first of all, because they're actually not a company with zero logistical backing. They've got bases and fighters in a lot of countries. They've been involved they've participated in conflicts around Africa as well. And I'm sure they have multiple sources of income, and they have like a department that deals with logistics and stuff, no doubt. They've proven themselves to be very organized on the battlefield, at least. I can't say for sure where they get their money, but I would imagine a lot of it comes from the Russian government in return for its participation in the Russian military operation. They obviously also get armaments from the Russian government as well for its participation in that conflict. And again, like, I would think they get that stuff from other governments as well, where they agree to cooperate with the government. For example, in Burkina Faso, there's been some talk about bringing Wagner in as a security force because they're kicking the French out, and they trust the Russians much more. So I would assume in that situation, they would get government funding in exchange for their security there. But yeah, that's all I can pretty much say about it. I'm not an expert on Wagner.
Thank you. And perhaps the last question on this theme: how do you see this affecting the special military operations? Perhaps both from a at the level of narrative and the narrative that the West is going to be able to spin off of it, but also at the level of just the fighting itself.
Well, the fighting, one thing that I think it was Sergei Surovikin, who's one of the, I think he's like one of the main generals of the Russian military operation. If I remember correctly, I think it was he who said it, actually it was Kadyrov. Kadyrov said that he criticized Prigozhin for creating this situation where the Russian soldiers who are on the front line right now have to fight the Ukrainian military and then also worry about what's behind them as well, because now some sort of potential civil war situation has emerged, and they don't know what's going to take place or what's going to happen tomorrow behind their backs. That's a really bad situation, obviously, for that to happen. But again, if the situation has been resolved already and Wagner is really returning to its bases, I really don't think it's actually going to have that big of an effect. Because also, like I mentioned earlier, I mean, the Ukrainian military has tried to take advantage of this, because obviously for everyone watching, I'm sure you all know that the Ukrainian counteroffensive is underway, and they've been putting a lot of manpower and Western supplied weapons and money into trying to make this work. It's failed miserably. And now they tried to take advantage of this, obviously, and they've made little to no gains. Even with these Russian soldiers not knowing what's going on behind their backs, they've been able to maintain their positions and continue to defend their lines. So I think, especially with this talk of potentially Lukashenko brokering an agreement between Wagner and the Russian Ministry of Defense, things might just return to normal soon. That's what I think is going to happen. So.
Well, we can certainly hope so. Just a more general question, perhaps divorced from the Wagner affair. You are, like us, a communist, a Marxist-Leninist, and you're located in Russia. So what are the prospects currently for the KPRF, the Communist Party of the Russian Federation? I know that they're backing the SMOs, and they've been some of the first people in favor of intervening in Ukraine to save the people from the Donbass. But what are the conditions of the party now? How's it viewed in the eyes of the people? Is there any potential for sometime in the future the KPRF, grabbing power or something? What's your position at the moment?
Well, it's still like the second most popular party in the country. It's all over the place. I mean, over in Russia, being a communist is not something that's like spooky or weird. Obviously, I mean, it depends who you ask. Like, I guess if you take the average Russian person and you tell them you're a communist, they're gonna be like, okay, it's like saying you're a Democrat in the United States or something. Obviously, if you talk to liberals, they're going to be like, oh, you like the Soviet Union, But it doesn't really matter about that, because the majority of the population here is not like that. They're mostly against liberalism, and also the Communist Party has actually been attracting a lot of youth in recent years. I know that because I myself, I'm not a member of the party, but I cooperate and collaborate a lot with Communist Party members, and there's a huge amount of young people in the party and joining the party as well. And again, it's because of the actions it's taking. Like the KPRF really has a strategy of leading by example. Like you said, it was one of the first organizations to call for active support for the peoples of Donbass. In fact, I think it was the very first political organization that is represented in the government Duma that started calling for that. And they've been moving a lot of humanitarian aid to Donetsk and Lugansk and Kherson and Zaporozhye. They've been really active in helping them out humanitarian in the humanitarian sphere, as well as helping out the military as well, because they're part of they are communists, but they're part of this anti-imperialist united front. And that's what I think we really need to get across to these communists in the West, so-called communists, who are for some reason against the special military operation. It goes completely against what communists around the world who are actually in power stand for. Like the KPRF is not in power, but it's the second largest political party in this country. The DPRK supports the KPRF and the military operation. China is officially neutral, but we know that they're tacitly, against NATO. They tacitly are happy that Russia is challenging this global, this Western attempt at, establishing global hegemony, because it also threatens China. But they're trying to play it safe as well. But I mean, every Cuba supports Russia as well. Pretty much every communist country in the world supports Russia in this military operation. It's only Western leftists who, for some reason, have some understanding that the Ukrainian neo-Nazis are a progressive force in the world, or they think that there are no Ukrainian neo-Nazis. Like, this is something we really have to dispel in Western communist circles, I would say, because the majority of communists around the world who are actually doing things, they're not in agreement with that line of thinking.
That's wonderfully said. And it's not just the communist states, the 5 official communist states. It's also all the other socialist states in Latin America,
Right.
Venezuela, Nicaragua, Bolivia, that are supporting Russia and the special military operations.
For sure. And if people want to know more about the argument in favor of the SMO, check out Donald's video on the Revolution Report that you did when the SMO was first launched. That was instrumental for me in kind of wrapping my head around what was going on. And this is a really great video on the deep dive you did into the far right groups in Ukraine, to the point where you were even getting YouTube advertisements to join Right Sector.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah,
really,
it was.
really interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, it was crazy. There was Right Sector, one of these organizations that is clearly neo-fascist, and YouTube was allowing them to spread Nazi propaganda when meanwhile RT is blocked. What is that?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Donald, thank you so much for coming on and clarifying what's objectively a very complex affair. Is there anything you'd like to plug before we go?
Once again, I gotta tell the whole audience that they should really watch 8 Years Before. It's a documentary film. You can find it on my YouTube channel, which is called The Revolution Report. But we've also got a website. We're more like an informational outlet. And this documentary film, I actually filmed it with the famous international heavyweight fighting champion Jeff Monson, who's also a communist.
Yes.
Yeah, dude. I filmed it with him, in collaboration with him. It's our film. And we filmed it there in 2021 because we were upset that this conflict was continuing and not getting any international attention. So we filmed it before the military operation began. And as we were developing the film, the military operation was launched, and we were like, crap, we have to radically rethink what the story of this movie is going to be. But it came at the best time ever, because now this film is an explanation for why Russia launched this military operation in the first place, when most people in the West have never even heard of Donbass, and they think that Russia just attacked Ukraine without any sort of good reason. Our film very well illustrates those reasons, and it's got interviews with people who lived on right next to the line of confrontation in Lugansk, in Donetsk, people who had their lives changed, they were turned into cripples because of Ukrainian bombardments of civilian areas. It's all in the film. I highly suggest watching it. And again, I want to say to you guys, thanks a lot for the invitation, the great discussion, and the ability to talk to your audience about that as well.
Of course. Thank you for coming on, brother. And we got to have you back on to talk about more general topics and other parts of your work as well. Thank you for coming on.
Yeah, with pleasure. Thank you.